Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes should spend 15 years in prison and pay $800 million in restitution to investors defrauded in her blood testing startup. U.S. prosecutors recommended this late on Friday, November 11th. Today we're going to talk about Holmes' sentencing, which will happen in a few days, and we're going to briefly talk about the prosecution's sentencing memo, including why Holmes should be sentenced to 15 years and ordered to pay $800 million in restitution. We're also going to go over what lawyers, experts, the press, and I think about when it comes to how many years in prison Holmes will get and how much restitution she'll be forced to pay. Elizabeth Holmes' sentencing is happening this week. Her excuses, postponements, requests for retrial, mistrials, and every other excuse she's tried and thrown at the wall have failed, and she will be sentenced on November 18th, which is this Thursday. Balwani has had his sentencing pushed slightly. His attorneys did request a 4-month push, but the judge has pushed this only to December 7th, so I'm very confident that will go ahead on December 7th. Before we talk about what the experts are thinking her sentencing will be, there are a few things to point out in the sentencing memo and pre-sentencing report, as these points are important things to remember when looking at why she will be sentenced to the amount of time she is. I will leave links to the sentencing memo and everything else below. The sentencing memo weighs in at 46 pages, so we're going to just go over the main parts. I want to give credit to the Theranos subreddit. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I spend a lot of time over there because although I've obsessively followed Holmes and Theranos for 15 years, I'm not a lawyer and people break down the trial stuff over there. I wanted to specifically highlight poster Matt H. Wink, who broke down a lot of this stuff, so go and check out their post. In the opening, there is a counter to what the defense has been saying in their document, and this is quite an important statement because it talks about the lack of remorse Holmes has shown, and the lack of remorse she's shown is really going to affect her sentencing. The opening says, quote, Holmes speaks eloquently about her desires to innovate and improve healthcare. She has demonstrated a strong work ethic, charisma, and ambition, but she is blinded by that ambition. Her reality distortion field put and will continue to put people in harm's way. She stands before the court remorseless. She accepts no responsibility. Quite the opposite. She insists she is the victim. End quote. The government is recommending a sentence of 180 months in custody. The court is also recommending that Holmes should serve a 3-year term of supervised release, pay full restitutions to her investors, including Walgreens and Safeway, which is interesting because they were not part of the charges. They were part of the trial, however. And the government recommends that Holmes pays the required special assessment for each count. This means that the prosecution's sentencing report, the PSR, recommends 20 years. Technically more than that, but they can't recommend more than 20 because that is the maximum for wire fraud. Interestingly, they're not shooting for the moon here, despite the PSR giving them the ability to do so. Prosecutors are asking for 15 years in custody for Holmes. So let's talk a little bit about the restitution and Holmes's current assets and what they estimate she owes in legal fees. The preponderance of evidence shows that Theranos C1 and C2 investors, Walgreens, Safeway, and George Shultz, suffered a loss of over $803 million. Based on the PSR, it appears that Holmes has modest assets outweighed by $450,000 in loans for her SEC settlement and a liability for legal fees in excess of $30 million. The PSR notes it's unknown whether any third parties, guarantors, or others are also liable or expected to pay the legal fees. This is basically saying they have no idea how Holmes is going to pay these legal fees or if there is a third party that's going to pay them. And all of this restitution stuff is basically why she will not marry Billy Evans, because then he wouldn't be able to fund her lifestyle. And it's basically how she's still living in these massive mansions and living these lavish lifestyles, because she technically doesn't have any money, although she probably does, but the lifestyle is funded through Billy Evans. So it basically seems she's going to live the rest of her life being funded by others, because these numbers that they're talking about, like 800 million, like that's a crazy, no one could ever pay that. It's an insane number. But I don't think it will be 800 million. I would think it would be more in line with 80 million, 90 million, because they're including Walgreens, Safeway, and George Shultz in all of this. And there is a whole discussion in the PSR and the memo about loss and factoring all that in, but it's super long. And obviously they're really putting in all the stops in this document to really go for it. But I don't think 800 million will be the restitution that she's sentenced to. The PSR also notes that Holmes's family appears to have substantial assets and that Holmes is managing her affairs to avoid subjecting their assets to any judgment in this case. Also, things like her brother worked for her for a very long time, so he could have been being paid some exorbitant salary, which he probably was, and it could have been set up as a safety net or something so that she can tap into that. I mean, that's just conspiracy theory, really. But there is, when you're rich, you can set up all these things. So I wouldn't be surprised if she has something else somewhere. But nothing would surprise me with Elizabeth Holmes. The prosecutors summarize Holmes' lies started in 2010. They contend her altruistic motives were a ploy and Holmes continued to lie. In the defense memo, they cited her altruistic motives a lot, and Holmes also got 130 letters of support from family, friends, and some political and celebrity faces like Cory Booker, and these letters echoed what the defense memo said, that she had this noble cause and had altruistic motives. And something that you can really point to and say, this is not true, what the defense memo and these letters are saying, which is essentially that Holmes did self-correct. She absolutely did not. And something that really highlights that is after John Carreyrou published his first article, Holmes went on Mad Money and lied and said all the tests were run on Theranos' own equipment and that they never used commercially available equipment for finger stick based tests. I mean, that's just a flat out lie and not a self-correction. Also, just one other thing to mention before we get into the sentencing, what I think she's going to be sentenced to, what other people think she's going to be sentenced to, is the fact that the judge has total discretion here. They don't have to go on anything that's in the memo reports. It's totally up to Judge Davila. He isn't bound by any of the memos or the PSR. He can even cite outside the guidelines if he wants to, although I don't think that he will. He can go over the guidelines, he can go under them, he can go over or under what they've asked for. It really is just up to the judge. So let's talk about the sentencing and put down our bets. What do I think Holmes will get after all of this? As I've said, I've followed Holmes and the company for over 15 years. And if you want to know anything else about Theranos, there's a ton of videos on my channel, which I have linked down below and in the cards above. And I've watched a lot of experts, lawyers talking about all of this. I did think in the beginning she may get less than 8 years in prison. There was a lot of, the case being pushed and all of these other things. And I did think that she would just really throw in a last ditch apology, especially when she took the stand. I always thought she would take the stand in her own defense, and I thought she would use that as an opportunity to maybe turn on the waterworks, maybe say she was sorry, but she still hasn't apologized or taken accountability, which is severely working against her. I cannot overstate how much that is working against her, because it's just one of the biggest factors that a judge is thinking about when sentencing someone. Have they apologized? Have they shown remorse? And she absolutely hasn't. There are a few things working in her favor though. As I mentioned, she got 130 letters in support from a wide variety of family, friends, and people she knows. Also, she was young when this started, and that will work in her favor as well. Plus, the abuse she alleges from Balwani, him being an older man, and although they've kind of done away with the making it seem as though she was some sort of puppet. The narrative definitely is that Holmes knew what she was doing. She was in control of her own ideas. She wasn't installed as some female young founder that Sunny was having her do her bidding, but she does still say the relationship was abusive, and the judge will weigh this in his sentencing. As my last video spoke about, Holmes is pregnant with her second child, and she does have a young first child who is a toddler. I did talk about this in, I think, the end of the summer when the rumors were first starting, and it's just crazy that she would have one child when she knew she was going to prison for a long time, but two is even more insane. And although I'm sure she thinks that it will help with sympathy, I just don't think that that's going to weigh in, because that is her decision. She knew she was going in most likely to prison, so I don't think that the judge will really take that into account. The biggest thing working against her is one of the major points the prosecution noticed, what I mentioned earlier, is that she has yet to show any remorse to any victims. Patients who got bad results, employees, the Schultz family, Erica Chung, nobody. The number one thing a judge wants to see is remorse. Now she could make a statement during the hearing, but that could totally backfire, and it could also backfire for sentencing, but for her appeals, which I'm sure she will do. While she does have a strong reality distortion field, her remorse in the past has been lackluster at best. The interview she gave where she said, "I'm devastated, I wish we could have done things differently," that's not really remorse or an apology. The other thing working against her is Balwani. Most people seem to believe she and Balwani are going to get very similar sentences. I do think this is the case. I think it would only be a few years difference, because although he was found guilty of more charges, it really, when you're taking into account the levels, they're pretty much the same. I would say Balwani maybe would be sentenced to 14 to 18 years, which I think will be very similar to Holmes, because from everything I've seen, it seems that most people seem to think Holmes will get around 10 to 15 years. And I've seen a lot of people hopeful for 20, which 20 is totally possible if Judge Villa weighs her lack of remorse very highly. He also could agree with the prosecution that her tech seriously endangered lives. So that is what I think is going to happen. I think Holmes will probably be sentenced to 10 to 15 years and probably 80 to 90 million in restitution. I think Balwani will be a similar amount, maybe a couple of years higher, but it will definitely be interesting to see, and I will of course be covering it on the 18th when it all goes down for Holmes, and the 7th when Balwani is sentenced. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so that you can know the second that I upload. I have a lot more videos coming out on Holmes and other subjects. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!